I want to tell you a story. And before I do, if you've ever felt invisible at work, if you've ever poured your heart and soul into something just to watch someone else sign their name to it, I need you to do me a favor. Hit that like button and let me know in the comments that I'm not just screaming into the void here. Your story matters. My story matters. And it helps to know we're not alone. My name is Jasmine. I'm a senior architect, and this is the story of how I built a gilded cage for my boss, handed him the key, and then simply walked away with the real prize. It all started with the hiss of a high-end espresso machine and the smell of expensive, unearned confidence. The conference room felt like an aquarium. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides looked out over a city that I had helped shape, building by building, over 15 years. Inside, the air was thick with the suffocating politeness of a high-stakes client meeting. At the head of the long marble table stood Julian Croft, our firm's new head of design. He was a supernova of charisma in a $1,000 suit, a man who could sell sand in the Sahara and make you feel privileged to buy it. He gestured with perfectly manicured hands toward the holographic model, shimmering in the center of the table, the Athelgard Tower, my creation, my beautiful, brilliant, fatally flawed creation. It was a masterpiece of architectural deception, a twisting helix of steel and glass that seemed to defy gravity, its delicate lattice exoskeleton glittering like a jewel. It was breathtaking, and it was designed to fail. Julian, of course, had no idea. He was lavishing praise on it, using words I had written in a memo, spinning a narrative of sustainable elegance and visionary engineering that he'd lifted directly from my project brief. He pointed to a soaring curve. He said, "This is where artistry meets ambition." That line was mine. He traced the delicate connection points of the lattice. He said, "We are not just building a structure, we are crafting a legacy." That one was also mine. I sat to his right, a few seats down, the dutiful senior architect, the ghost in the machine. My face was a mask of placid professionalism, but inside, a quiet, cold mechanism was ticking down the final seconds. For the last month, this had been my secret, singular focus. I had fed Julian a series of these concepts, dazzling on the surface, but with subtle, deeply rooted engineering impossibilities. Flaws that only a seasoned architect or structural engineer would ever spot on a blueprint, let alone in a glossy render. The kind of flaws that get hidden by a magnetic personality and a torrent of corporate buzzwords. Today was the culmination. He was presenting the most beautiful and most broken of them all to Sterling Hale Developments, our biggest and most discerning client. He thought this was his masterpiece, the project that would cement his legacy at the firm. He was peacocking, preening, utterly unaware that he was walking a tightrope over a canyon, and I had just handed him a pair of scissors. Because 24 hours earlier, a junior architect on my team, a brilliant, loyal kid named Leo, had sent an email to Mr. Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Hale. The email contained a zip file labeled AH Preliminary Structural Study V3. Attached was a polite, unassuming note. It said, "Mr. Sterling, per our brief internal review, my team lead asked me to forward this alternative structural approach for your consideration. It's just a preliminary thought, but we believe it solves some of the potential torsional stress issues in more ambitious lattice designs. Regards, Leo Martinez." Inside that file was not the Athelgard Tower. It was the real design, the Sterling Spire. It was just as beautiful, just as ambitious, but this one was viable, it was strong, it was honest, and its foundation had my name carved into its conceptual frame. Julian was now wrapping up his presentation, a triumphant smile plastered on his face. He was a conductor finishing a symphony, expecting a standing ovation. I held my breath. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that. It was about clarity. It was about creating a situation so clear, so stark, that the truth would be the only thing left visible when the smoke cleared. Julian turned to Mr. Sterling, his arms open wide as if to embrace the applause. He said, "So, what do you think?" A quiet heat flushed up my neck. The show was about to begin. The first betrayal didn't happen in a glass-walled conference room. It happened on a Tuesday, under the flat, unforgiving fluorescent lights of our own office. It was a smaller sin, a dress rehearsal for the grand larceny to come. Julian had been with the firm for 2 months. He'd been hired from a competitor, brought in over me for the head of design role I had been promised for 2 years. The board wanted a new voice, a rainmaker. I was the opposite. I was the one who made sure the rain didn't wash the whole house away. I was substance, not style. A quiet pillar, not a flashy facade. Julian had called an all-hands design meeting to review pitches for the new civic library. My team and I had worked for weeks on a concept called the lens. It was an intricate, layered design that used angled glass and light wells to draw natural sunlight into the deepest parts of the building, minimizing energy use and creating these beautiful shifting patterns of light throughout the day. It was complex, efficient, and poetic. I was proud of it. I walked Julian through the model the day before the meeting. He nodded, his eyes scanning it but not really seeing it. He said things like, "Great synergy, Jasmine, really disruptive. Corporate word salad." He didn't ask a single technical question, not one. The next day, in the meeting, he stood up to kick things off. He projected an image onto the main screen. It was my design, my renderings. He started talking. He said, "I had a flash of inspiration over the weekend. What if a library wasn't a box for books, but a lens for knowledge? What if the building itself could read the sky?" He then proceeded to present my entire concept, my narrative, my core philosophy, as his own spontaneous, brilliant idea. He didn't just steal the design, he stole the soul behind it. I sat there, frozen. My team, my 3 junior architects, were looking at me. Their faces were a mixture of shock and confusion. Leo, the youngest and brightest of them, looked like he'd been punched in the gut. I could feel the heat rising in my face, a prickling tide of pure, unadulterated humiliation. Julian finished to a round of applause from the other teams who knew no better. He glanced at me and gave a little wink, a conspiratorial gesture that said, "We're in this together." It was so brazen, so utterly dismissive of my existence, that it almost broke through my composure. After the meeting, he caught me by the coffee machine. He put a hand on my shoulder, his touch feeling like a brand. He said, "Great work, us." I wanted to tell him that there was no us in this. There was him, a thief, and me, the person he had just robbed in broad daylight. But I didn't. I just nodded. I said, "Of course, Julian, for the good of the firm." He smiled, a wide, predatory smile. He said, "Exactly. You get it. That's why you're my rock, Jasmine." I went back to my desk, the word rock echoing in my head. A rock is something you stand on, something you use for a foundation, and then forget it's even there. That night, I didn't go home. I sat in my car in the empty corporate parking garage for 3 hours, the engine off, the silence pressing in on me. The carefully constructed walls of my professionalism, built over 15 years of late nights, impossible deadlines, and quiet competence, began to crumble. This wasn't just about credit. It was about erasure. I thought back to my first day at this firm. I was 25, fresh out of my master's program, terrified and thrilled. The man who hired me, the firm's founder, was Arthur Vance. Arthur was a legend, an architect of the old school. He believed that buildings had a moral compass. He used to say, "A structure that lies is worse than a structure that falls, because it falls on the inside first." He saw something in me, a meticulousness, an obsession with the bones of a design. He mentored me. He taught me that the most elegant solution was almost always the most honest one. Arthur had passed away 2 years ago. His absence had left a vacuum of principle that the board, in their infinite wisdom, had decided to fill with Julian's hot air. Sitting there in the dark, I felt a profound sense of failure, not just for myself, but for Arthur. I had let his legacy, his firm, be hijacked by a charlatan. The tears that finally came weren't hot with anger. They were cold with a terrible, clarifying grief. I wasn't just being undermined. The very foundation of my professional world, the principles Arthur had taught me, were being desecrated. This was the breakdown, the moment where the weight of it all became too much. The injustice was a physical thing, a crushing pressure in my chest. I saw my future stretching out ahead of me, a long gray corridor of being Julian's rock, his ghostwriter, his silent partner in a one-sided collaboration. My best ideas would be his triumphs. My expertise would be the invisible scaffolding holding up his celebrated career. I would be paid well. I would be respected by those who knew, but I would be, for all public purposes, erased. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I couldn't live like that. The next morning, I walked into the office and my eyes were clear. The grief had burned away, leaving something hard and crystalline in its place: resolve. Leo was waiting for me at my desk, a cup of coffee in his hand. His face was etched with concern. He was just 23, but he had old eyes. He saw things. He said, "Jasmine, that was not okay yesterday." What he did, I know, Leo, I said, taking the coffee. Thank you. He hesitated, then pushed a folder across my desk. He said, I ran the numbers on the load-bearing columns for the light wells in the lens, the ones he was talking about. Julian's spontaneous adjustments to the curvature would have created a shear point right at the third-floor junction. It wouldn't have been catastrophic, but it would have required millions in reinforcement to fix. He didn't even realize what he was changing. He was just trying to make it look more dynamic. He was fiddling with the guts of the thing without understanding the anatomy. That was it. That was the catalyst. It wasn't just that Julian was a thief. He was a dangerous one. His ignorance, cloaked in charisma, was a liability that could one day bring down more than just a presentation. It could bring down a building. He wasn't just stealing my work. He was breaking it in the process. I looked at Leo, at his earnest, worried face. He was the kind of architect Arthur would have loved, honest, meticulous. He cared about the work, not the glory. And in that moment, my resolve sharpened into a plan. It wasn't enough to leave. It wasn't enough to complain to HR, an organization that valued rainmakers over architects. That would be seen as sour grapes. I would be the disgruntled woman who couldn't handle a strong male leader. No, the only way to prove what Julian was to let him prove it himself, on the biggest stage possible. I had to build him a pedestal so high that the fall would be undeniable. I looked at the folder Leo had given me, the evidence of Julian's casual incompetence. It felt like the first piece of a much larger blueprint, a blueprint for a quiet, elegant, and absolutely devastating coup. I said, Leo, can you keep this between us? He nodded, his expression firm. He said, always, Jasmine. You taught me everything I know. I managed a small, genuine smile. I said, good, because I think we're about to start a new project. It's a very ambitious design. It was then that the idea for the Athelgard Tower began to form, a beautiful trap, a gilded cage. I would design it, and Julian, in his hubris, would walk right into it. The plan wasn't born of a single moment of anger, but of a slow, creeping realization that the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. It was designed to reward the Julians of the world. So I decided I would have to design a better system. The plan required patience, precision, and a complete compartmentalization of my own ethics. It felt in many ways like designing a building for a hostile environment. You don't fight the environment, you use its own forces, the wind, the pressure, the temperature to strengthen your structure. Julian's ego was the wind, his ignorance the pressure. I would use them to build my case. It started with a new private folder on my encrypted personal drive, a drive the firm's IT department didn't know existed. I labeled it Project Chimera. Inside, I created two subfolders, Gilded Cage and Escape Pod. Gilded Cage was where the flawed masterpieces would live. Escape Pod was where I built the lifeboats. For the next month, my life split into two parallel tracks. By day, I was Julian's ever-reliable rock. I'd attend his brainstorming sessions, which were really just him talking in circles, throwing out words like synergy, paradigm, and storytelling, while I sketched out the actual viable concepts on my notepad. He'd glance over, see a compelling shape, and claim it. He'd say, yes, that, like that, as if he'd simply coaxed the idea out of me. I let him. I started feeding him designs that were more and more spectacular. The Triton Bridge, a pedestrian bridge that looked like a cresting wave, but whose support cables would create a harmonic resonance with foot traffic that would make it structurally unsound. The Orion Art Center, a concert hall with a stunning cantilevered roof that would, over about 5 years, sag just enough to crack the delicate acoustic panels that made it functional. Each one was a siren song for an ego like his. Beautiful, seductive, and destined for the rocks. He devoured them. He presented them internally with increasing fanfare, building his reputation as the firm's visionary savior. And with each presentation, I collected more data. I recorded the meetings. I saved the email chains where he would take my detailed notes and rephrase them as his own directives. I was building a quiet, meticulous archive of his fraud. My allies in this were few, but they were crucial. Leo was my first and most important. He was my firewall and my co-conspirator. He understood the stakes. He saw the danger Julian posed, not just to my career, but to the firm's integrity, the legacy of Arthur Vance that he too revered. Our subplot unfolded in late-night sessions in my office, long after Julian and the other executives had left for expensive dinners. With the door locked, We would work on the escape pod projects. These were the real designs. For every flawed concept I fed Julian, we built its honest, brilliant counterpart. The flawed Triton Bridge had a sister design, a stronger, more elegant arch bridge that was actually buildable. The broken Orion Arts Center had a twin, one with a properly supported roof that achieved the same aesthetic with sound engineering. Leo would run the structural analysis simulations, his brow furrowed in concentration. He'd look up from his screen and say the torsional stress on the Ethelgard's main spire exceeds safety limits by 40% under projected wind loads. It's a house of cards. Then he'd switch to the other file, the Sterling Spire. He'd smile. And this one is a fortress. It was a strange, intense time. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself, night after night. It was a forensic exercise. It was about creating a perfect, undeniable A/B test. On one side, Julian's chosen design, a beautiful lie. On the other, the truth. I was isolating a variable. That variable was competence. My second, more distant ally was Mr. Sterling himself, though he didn't know it yet. I had a history with him, or rather, he had a history with Arthur Vance. I remembered a meeting years ago for the foundation of the Sterling Hale headquarters. Mr. Sterling, a gruff, intimidating man with a reputation for shredding architects who tried to dazzle him with fluff, had been grilling Arthur about the bedrock analysis. I was a junior member of the team then, just taking notes. At one point, Arthur turned to me and said, "Jasmine, show him the deep soil report." I had spent a week on that report, going far beyond what was required, and I nervously handed it over. Mr. Sterling spent 10 minutes reading it in silence. The whole room held its breath. Finally, he looked up, not at Arthur, but at me. He said, "You understand that the ground under a building is more important than the sky above it." I'd never forgotten that. He was a man who understood foundations. He was the perfect audience for my play. The hidden leverage in my plan wasn't a patent or a contract clause, it was trust. The trust I had in Leo's loyalty, and the trust I was gambling on from Mr. Sterling, his trust in honest work over a flashy sales pitch. The final piece of the plan was a small, independent LLC I had formed 2 years prior, right after Arthur passed away. I'd called it Jasmine Vance Associates, a quiet tribute. I'd set it up on the advice of my lawyer, a shrewd woman who had told me, "Always have a lifeboat, even if you love the ship you're sailing on." It was a dormant shell company, a legal entity with a bank account and nothing else. It was my parachute. As the day of the big Sterling Hale presentation approached, the tension in the office was electric. Julian was in his element, a whirlwind of activity, demanding new renders, tweaking color palettes, rehearsing his speech. He was utterly consumed by the surface of the thing. He never once asked to see the structural schematics. He never once asked Leo about the underlying engineering models. He just trusted that his rock had taken care of it. The night before the presentation, Leo and I stayed late one last time. The office was dark and silent, a concrete tomb. On my screen was the final presentation for Julian's Ethelgard Tower. On Leo's screen was the packaged preliminary study for the Sterling Spire. It included the full, unredacted structural analysis, the kind of data-rich, no-nonsense document that a man like Mr. Sterling would appreciate. Leo looked at me, his expression grave. He said, "Are you sure about this, Jasmine? This is a big move." I looked at the two designs side by side, the lie and the truth. One was a monument to ego. The other was a testament to the work. It felt like the clearest choice I'd ever made. I said, "Julian is steering this firm towards an iceberg, Leo. I'm just handing him a more accurate map and letting the client choose the course." It wasn't about revenge. It was about navigation. He nodded, understanding. He attached the file to a new email addressed to Mr. Sterling's personal inbox, an address I had saved from that meeting years ago. The subject line was unassuming. The body of the email was polite and professional. He hit send. There was a quiet whoosh from his computer speakers. It felt like the softest, most powerful sound I had ever heard. The first domino had been pushed. The rest was just a matter of physics. The morning of the presentation was a masterpiece of corporate theater. Julian strode into the office like a conquering hero, his energy filling every corner of the floor. He was wearing a suit so sharp it could have cut glass, and a smile that radiated pure, unadulterated triumph. He gathered the core team, which included me and Leo, for a last-minute pep talk. He clapped me on the back, a gesture of ownership. He said, "Today, we make history. Jasmine, you've built us a beautiful ship." Now it's my job to sail it into the promised land. The metaphor was so painfully ironic, I almost smiled. He had no idea the ship was a ghost ship, and the promised land was a sandbar. Leo stood beside me, his face pale but resolute. He gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The package had been delivered. The silent takeover was in motion. We drove to the Sterling Hale Tower in separate cars. I remember the city sliding past my window, the familiar landmarks that I had a hand in creating. The Staunton building with its complex curtain wall system that I'd redesigned over a single weekend to save the project. The Riverside Park, whose lighting and irrigation systems I had personally spec'd out. My work was woven into the fabric of this city, silent and essential, and I was about to add a new, invisible thread to that tapestry. The Sterling Hale boardroom was even more intimidating than I remembered. It was a study in understated power, dark wood, soft leather, and a view that stretched to the horizon. Mr. Sterling sat at the center of the table, flanked by his board of directors. He was exactly as I recalled, older, with piercing eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He gave a curt nod as we entered. No smiles, no pleasantries. He was here for business. Julian, of course, launched into his performance. He was magnetic. The holographic model of the Othelgard Tower shimmered to life, and he began to spin his tale. He spoke of community, of light, of a new icon for the city skyline. He used my words, my concepts, with such conviction that for a fleeting moment, even I almost believed him. I watched Mr. Sterling's face. He was impassive, his expression unreadable. He wasn't looking at the flashy renders. He was looking at the junction points. He was looking at the places where beauty met physics. Julian was approaching his grand finale. He gestured to the impossibly slender spire that topped the tower. He said, "And this is our statement." A needle threading the sky, a testament to what is possible when vision is untethered. He finished, holding the pose, a smug, expectant look on his face. The room was silent, not the appreciative silence he was hoping for, but a heavy, questioning silence. Mr. Sterling leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. He said, "It's a beautiful vision, Mr. Croft, a very dramatic design." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Then came the first move, the quiet, precise question that was the equivalent of a sniper's shot. He said, "I have a technical question about the exoskeleton's load distribution, specifically regarding torsional stress from wind shear at the upper levels. Your lattice is elegant, but it appears to have a very high number of non-redundant nodes. What's your mitigation strategy for progressive failure in a high wind event?" The blood drained from Julian's face. Just a little, but I saw it. The question was a laser beam of technical specificity, and he had no idea how to answer it. He had no clue what a non-redundant node was. He started to bluster. "Well, our engineering team, which is the best in the business, led by Jasmine here," he gestured vaguely in my direction, "they've run extensive simulations. We are confident, extremely confident, in the structural integrity." He was floundering, using "we" and the team as a shield. Mr. Sterling's eyes narrowed. He wasn't interested in the team. He was interested in the answer. Then came the second shot, the one that broke the whole thing wide open. Mr. Sterling picked up a tablet from the table in front of him. He swiped the screen and looked at Julian. He said, "That's interesting, because my office received a preliminary study late yesterday from a junior architect at your firm, a Mr. Leo Martinez. It was for a very similar concept. He called it the Sterling Spire. It used a hybrid monocoque core with a secondary non-load-bearing lattice. The study addressed this exact torsional concern with remarkable clarity." He looked up from the tablet, his gaze like a drill bit. "So my question is, why are you showing us this version, which seems to have the very engineering problem your own team has already solved?" Boom! It was a direct hit. The panic in Julian's eyes was no longer subtle. It was a raging fire. He looked from Mr. Sterling to me, his face a mask of confusion and betrayal. He had no idea what the Sterling Spire was. He had never heard of it. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He was speechless. The air in the room crackled. The other Sterling Hale executives were now looking at Julian with open suspicion. The charismatic visionary had been revealed as a man who didn't understand his own product. I kept my face perfectly neutral, a mask of calm, professional concern. Inside, my heart was pounding a steady, triumphant rhythm. This was the moment, the quiet, public unraveling. Julian had walked into the beautiful cage, and the door had just clicked shut behind him. Mr. Sterling didn't wait for an answer. He turned to his team and said, "I think we have what we need." He then looked at me, a flicker of something, recognition, perhaps respect in his eyes. He said, "Miss?" He paused, glancing at the team roster in front of him. He found my name. "Miss Vance, your firm has some internal communication issues to resolve. We will be in touch." He stood up. The meeting was over. It was a brutal, elegant, and complete demolition. We packed up our equipment in stunned silence. Julian was white as a sheet, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to put his laptop back in its case. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. He had been exposed, and the worst part for him was that he didn't even understand how it had happened. The silent takeover was complete. The power hadn't shifted in a noisy confrontation. It had shifted in the space between a question and a non-answer. The car ride back to the office was the longest, most silent 10 minutes of Julian's life. He sat in the passenger seat of my car, staring out the window, a statue carved from rage and humiliation. The silence was louder than any argument. It was filled with his dawning realization that he had been played, and my quiet satisfaction that the trap had worked perfectly. When we walked back onto our floor, the atmosphere had already changed. News travels fast in an open-plan office. The members of my team who hadn't been at the presentation were trying to look busy, but I could see them watching us, sensing the seismic shift in the power dynamic. Julian stormed into his glass-walled office and slammed the door. 5 minutes later, an email popped up on my screen. The sender was Julian Croft. The subject line was just my name. The message was one line: "My office, now." I took a slow sip of water. I saved a copy of the email to my private drive. Then I stood up and walked towards his office. This was the part I had rehearsed in my mind 100 times. The desperate counter. Leo caught my eye as I walked past his desk. He looked terrified. I gave him the smallest, most reassuring smile I could manage. I had built this. I would see it through. I walked into Julian's office and closed the door behind me. He was pacing, his jacket off, his tie loosened. The mask of charisma was gone, replaced by a raw, ugly fury. He spun around to face me. "What was that?" he hissed. "What the hell was the Sterling Spire? And who is Leo Martinez to be sending private studies to my client?" I adopted an expression of carefully calibrated confusion. I said Leo is a junior architect on my team. A very promising one. As for the study, I'm not sure. Junior teams are always encouraged to explore alternative concepts. Perhaps he was just being proactive. My voice was calm, my tone professional. It was the most infuriating response I could have given him, because it was perfectly plausible and offered him nothing to grab onto. His face contorted. Proactive? He sent a competing proposal to our biggest client the night before the most important presentation of the year. He sabotaged us, Jasmine. He didn't sabotage us, I said, my voice still level. He may have saved us. Mr. Sterling had a valid technical concern, a concern, it seems, that Leo's study had already anticipated and solved. Julian stared at me, his mind racing, trying to connect the dots. He was a man drowning, and he was starting to suspect I was the one who had pushed him into the water. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "This was you. This had to be you. Leo wouldn't do this on his own." I didn't flinch. I said, "Julian, I did exactly what you asked. I built you the most beautiful design I could. You were the one who approved it. You were the one who presented it. My job is to provide the concepts. Your job as head of design is to understand them." The statement hung in the air between us, a brutal indictment of his incompetence. He had no comeback. He knew I was right. His authority was built on a foundation of sand, and the tide had just come in. The client exodus began the next morning. An official email arrived from Mr. Sterling's office, addressed to the firm's CEO, with Julian and me copied. The language was cold and corporate. It stated that Sterling Hale was formally passing on the Ethelgard Tower concept due to unresolved structural concerns. However, it continued. They were extremely interested in the preliminary study for the Sterling Spire and requested a formal proposal based on that design. The final sentence was the kill shot. We request that all future correspondence and development on this project be handled directly by the study's lead, Mr. Leo Martinez, and his senior supervising architect, Ms. Jasmine Vance. The email spread through the firm's executive level like a virus. Julian was neutered. The client had specifically named me and my most junior team member as the only people they would work with. They had cut him out of his own signature project. His desperate counter came that afternoon. He tried to fire Leo. He marched down to HR and demanded Leo's immediate termination for insubordination and violating company protocol. But I had anticipated this. 2 weeks earlier, I had Leo submit all his preliminary studies, including the Sterling Spire, to the official company archive, time-stamped and logged. I had also ensured his last performance review, which I wrote, was filled with phrases like exceptional proactivity, innovative problem solver, and a future leader. HR took one look at Julian's furious, unsubstantiated demand, and then at Leo's file, which now included a direct commendation from our biggest client. They politely told Julian that firing the one person the client had requested by name would be a catastrophically bad idea. He was checkmated. He came back to his office defeated. An hour later, he called me in again. The anger was gone, replaced by a desperate, cloying appeal. He asked me to sit. He offered me a drink. He said, "Jasmine, I've made a mistake. I've been relying on you too much without giving you the credit you deserve. I want to fix that. I want to announce you as a full partner in the firm, co-head of design. We'll run the department together." It was the very thing I had once wanted, the promotion I had been denied. And now, hearing it from his lips, it sounded like an insult. It was a bribe, a desperate attempt to buy my silence and co-opt my victory. He was offering me a fancier cage. I looked at him, at this hollow man trying to bargain with the one currency he had left, a currency I no longer valued. I let the silence stretch, enjoying the panicked look that was growing in his eyes. The power had not just shifted, it had completely inverted. He needed me now, and we both knew it. I stood up. I said, "Thank you for the offer, Julian. I'll need some time to consider it." I walked out of his office, leaving him in his self-made prison, and I knew I would never walk back in. The final confrontation wasn't a confrontation at all. It was a resignation. 2 days after Julian's pathetic offer, I booked a meeting with him. I walked into his office for the last time. He looked hopeful, expectant. He probably thought I was there to accept his offer, to help him salvage his career and paper over the cracks of his failure. He gestured for me to sit. I remained standing. I placed a single white envelope on his polished desk. He looked at it, then at me, confusion clouding his features. "What's this?" he asked. I said, "It's my resignation, Julian, effective immediately." The hope in his eyes vanished, replaced by a flash of his old anger, quickly followed by sheer panic. "You can't," he stammered. "The Sterling project, they asked for you." "I know," I said. My voice was calm, almost gentle. "That's the point. You see, the problem wasn't that you took credit for my work. I could have, and did, live with that for a while. The problem is that you don't understand the work. You sell blueprints you can't read, and that makes you a danger to the clients, to the firm, and to the legacy Arthur Vance built." I mentioned Arthur's name deliberately. I wanted him to know this wasn't just about my career. It was about a standard he could never meet. He was speechless. He just stared at me, the full weight of his predicament finally crashing down on him. Without me, he couldn't deliver on the Sterling Spire. The client wanted me, and I was leaving. He was completely and utterly exposed. I said, "You once told me I was your rock, but you were so busy looking at the sky, you never bothered to check the foundation. And a foundation built on lies can't hold any weight at all." I turned and walked toward the door. He found his voice, a last desperate gasp. "Where will you go? Sterling Hale will never work with a brand new, one-person firm. You're throwing away your career." I paused at the door and looked back at him. I gave him a small, pitying smile. I said I already did. The letter of intent was signed this morning. My new firm, Vance Associates, is now the lead architect on the Sterling Spire project. Mr. Sterling prefers to work with principals who personally vet their own structural analytics. Goodbye, Julian. I walked out and didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the collapse happening behind me. The vindication was quiet. It wasn't a triumphant party or a public shaming. It was the simple, profound peace of a new beginning. 2 weeks later, I got a text from Leo. It was a screenshot of an internal company-wide email. The subject was leadership transition. The email announced with great regret that Julian Croft was stepping down as head of design to pursue other opportunities. We all knew what that meant. He had been fired. His removal was a consequence, not a goal. He wasn't pushed. He fell from the pedestal he had so eagerly climbed. The system, once I had given it a firm, undeniable nudge, had corrected itself. The new reality was small, and it was perfect. My new office wasn't a sprawling corporate floor. It was a bright, airy loft space in a renovated warehouse district. The furniture wasn't designer marble. It was simple, functional, and paid for. My team consisted of 3 people. Leo, who had resigned the day after I did, and 2 other senior engineers from the old firm who had seen the writing on the wall and wanted to work for an architect, not a salesman. We were gathered around a large central table. In the middle of it was a beautiful, intricate scale model of the Sterling spire. It was strong, it was honest, it was ours. Mr. Sterling had been true to his word. He had not only given my new firm the contract, he had personally championed us, telling his peers in the industry that he'd found a firm that remembered how to build, not just how to pitch. It wasn't about the money or the title, it was about this feeling, the quiet confidence of a room full of people who were all there for the right reason, to do good work. It was the feeling of balance, of a world set right. My name was on the door, my principles were in the foundation, and for the first time in a long time, the view from my window, looking out at a city I loved, felt like it was truly my own. In my new office, on the wall behind my desk, I have a single framed document. It's not a diploma or an award. It's a copy of the email from Leo to Mr. Sterling, the one with the subject line, AH Preliminary Structural Study V3. To anyone else, it's just a meaningless piece of corporate correspondence. To me, it's a declaration of independence. It's the quietest, most powerful weapon I ever deployed. It's a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes don't start with a bang, but with a single, well-aimed keystroke. Some people might hear this story and say it was all about revenge, a cold, calculated plot to destroy a man's career. But I need you to understand, it was never about him. It was about me. It was about reclaiming my own name, my own work, my own value. For years, I had been waiting for someone else to recognize it, to validate it. I was waiting for a promotion, for a title, for a boss to give me the credit I was due. But the system isn't designed to reward quiet competence. It's designed to amplify the loudest voice in the room. Julian's mistake wasn't just that he was a thief and a fraud. His mistake was in thinking that my value was something he could possess, something he could control. He thought my ideas were assets he could strip mine. He never understood that the ideas were worthless without the integrity behind them. The real value was the mind that created them, the experience that tested them, and the principles that made them strong. I couldn't tear down the broken system at my old firm, but I could build my own. I could create a place where the foundation was honesty, where the load-bearing walls were competence, and where the name on the door meant something. And that's the moral of this story. Don't wait for a seat at a table where you're not respected. Build your own table. Don't wait for someone to give you a key. Build your own door. Your talent, your experience, your integrity, that is your real capital. It's the one asset no one can take from you. They can steal your ideas, they can take credit for your work, but they cannot steal your ability to create more. You are not a resource to be managed, you are a source. And if you are in a place that is trying to diminish you, to erase you, to make you a footnote on someone else's page, then your job is not to fight for credit. Your job is to create a new story with your name as the title. It's not about revenge. It's about authorship. It's about picking up the pen and writing your own damn future. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, if you've ever felt like your work and your worth were being ignored, please do all the things that help. Like this video so I know it reached you. Leave a comment below and share a piece of your own story, because there is power in knowing we are not alone in these fights. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and the little notification bell. There are more stories to tell and more foundations to build, and we're going to build them together.